Okay. Hey, everybody. Welcome. It's Wednesday. Real Talk on Real Estate. Jerome Maldonado, and we're live on YouTube. Look, ladies and gentlemen, today we're talking about hyperinflation. Okay? And so one of the big things with hyperinflation, I want to just kind of go over some of this stuff with you guys because people want to know, we're in a bubble. Is it going to burst? What's going to happen? We should have all this stuff set up. But we're going to get this stuff more professional over the next week and get this thing so it's cleaned up and looking good. And so one thing this week, we'll talk about hyperinflation. And people want to know, how far can this bubble go before it just blows up? Or will it? Will it blow up? And so one of the big things is it's a big question mark to so many people. And so we sit back and we go, okay, what is hyperinflation? Okay, so let's think about this for a second. Let's see what Google considers hyperinflation. Hyperinflation.
According to Investopedia, hyperinflation is a term to describe rapid, excessive, and out-of-control general price increases in an economy. While inflation is a measure of the pace of rising prices for goods and services, hyperinflation is rapidly rising inflation, typically measuring more than 50% per month.
So, ladies and gentlemen, if you didn't hear that, I'm going to read that again. Hyperinflation is a term to describe rapid, excessive, and out-of-control general price increases in an economy, while inflation is just a measure of the pace of rising prices for goods and services. So that's just normal annual appreciation. It's like you think about your home and you think, the average home should increase in value 2 to 3% every single year. That's normal inflation. But when hyperinflation hits, it's rapidly rising inflation, typically measuring more than 50% per month. So let me give you guys some examples. Okay, so we look at hyperinflation, and doesn't that sound pretty familiar with what's happening right now in the world? When you sit back and look at what's happened just in the last year, you take a look at raw food costs. So you take a look at how much food has increased. You look at meats and poultry. Our meats and poultries in our supermarkets has went up in excess of 100% over the last year. You take a look at lumber; it's increased well over 280% in the last year. And so when you sit back and you think, okay, how much crazier can things get? And you think about all the inflation. When you're thinking about fossil fuels, you're thinking about gasoline, you think about all the building and construction materials, you think about housing costs. Housing prices this year in the last 12 months has increased by over 16%. And I'm going to go over that here in just a little bit and kind of relate this to hyperinflation and why the economy right now is starting to show signs of hyperinflation. And so we sit back and we go, okay, if food prices are increasing, lumber is increasing, material costs are increasing, everybody out there is starting to increase their prices. In fact, so much so that when I go out, I just talked to a customer today and they said, is concrete prices going through the roof? Because the prices that we're getting to do our installs are significantly higher than they have ever been, and they're out of control. And so I told them, yes, we're starting to see inflation on construction materials where rebar, steel, all that stuff is going up. We take a look at construction materials like concrete, and it's went up twice this year. Typically, it goes up every January, and we'll see a 3%, 5% increase on prices each year, but not 8% in the beginning of the year, then 8 to 10% a few months into the year, and then who knows if we start seeing another increase. And so we sit back and we caution ourselves, because not only is materials and building materials that are going up, it's labor is going up. And here's the problem, okay, is that you sit back and you go, there's 7.4 million jobs there's 7.4 million job openings in the world right now, okay, or in the United States, 7.4 million right here in the United States. Now, you would think that with the employment rate being so high, that with 7.4 million job openings, that it would be easy to find workers. And that's not the case. In fact, out of the 7.4 million job openings that are available, only 266,000 were fulfilled when that stat came out. So people don't want to work. And the reason is we've printed over what we've done is we've printed well over $3 trillion in money in the last year. And so what does that do to our economy? When you're out there printing money every day and stimulating it, what ends up happening is the value of that dollar bill, it drops. And so I talked about this in Real Estate Domination 2019. This is one of the predictions that I talked about that's coming true. And I told people at Real Estate Domination 2019, I said, the economy has to shift at some point in time, because even in 2019, the prices had appreciated by 40% over where they were on the residential real estate sector pre-pandemic. I mean, not pre-pandemic, pre-recession 2008. And so now we've hyperinflated way past that. And so you sit back and you go, okay, so our money is starting to devalue. We printed $3 trillion. That money was supposed to go in to stimulate the economy, and it hasn't. And so people have just spent it. And so what scientists say is that if you take all the money in the world and you distribute it equally, within 2 years, it's going to be back into the same people's hands. And 100% of it in 5 years will be entirely back into the same people's hands. And so understand that the way the world works is based on economics. And we're starting to look more like a socialist country when you think about how much money is being pushed into the economy through the federal government and the handouts. And so you sit back and you take a look at those 7.4 million jobs, and only 266,000 of them fulfilled. Well, we know that there's thousands upon thousands, millions of Americans that are getting unemployment right now, and they're getting $400 to $800 per week in unemployment. Is it enough to live? Well, it's just enough to live, but so much so that people don't want to go back to work. They're willing to live in poverty. They go back to work because that's just enough to make a living and just make it. I remember I go heli skiing up in Alaska every February. This past year during the pandemic, I didn't go up to Alaska, and I didn't go heli skiing because of the pandemic. But every year I go up to Alaska and I go heli skiing up in Valdez, Alaska. And I talk to the locals down there. And one of the big things when I talk to the locals is because of the oil, because of the great American pipeline that's been in Alaska for so many years, they give every single household $12,000 per year just as a stipend bonus for putting up with the pipelines. And one of the things that Alaska battles more than anything is heroin and drug abuse. And one of the contributing factors that they're saying is that contributes to that is because of the stipend that they get, the free money that they get each and every year. And so I talk to the people are well aware of this. And they sit back, and now that the Great American Pipeline has been shut down, they're not getting that stipend anymore. So it's created economic issues in Alaska. Now, this has been going on for several years. And the reason I use that as an example is I say, what are we doing to our American society and our capitalistic country as we continue to pump money into the economy? You know, people are going out there, they spend it frivolously. The government's supporting and trying to take care of people. They're trying to take care of business. That's not capitalism, ladies and gentlemen. That's socialism. And so understand that we were born and founded as Americans in a capitalistic country, the land of opportunity, the home of the free, the same thing that our forefathers went and fought for, walked barefoot from Virginia to Pennsylvania and fought for our freedom that people don't take advantage of. And so we're printing out this money, but people are just taking the handouts, right? $400, $800 a week, and they don't want to go back to work. And so I don't care if they get on CNN and they say, hey, that's not the contributing factor. What we know is it is a big part of the contributing factor. It's proven so in other states and other areas where they've given handouts financially from the government. And so, look, that's one of the reasons that when we sit there back and we talk about how bad it is to print money and just give it out, we sit back and say, okay, so how much of that is going to continue? And as we print money, our money devalues. And the reason this happens, what most people don't know, is there's what's called the central banking system, which actually controls, runs, and facilitates the Federal Reserve. And what most people don't realize that are watching this video right now is that the Federal Reserve is a non-governmental agency. Most people think that the Federal Reserve is a governmental agency. And so if you go in and you have a non-governmental agency, our Constitution says that no one but our federal government is supposed to print money. And so the Federal Reserve was implemented and created by the central banking system back in 1912. In 1913, it was the first year that we as Americans got assessed income taxes. And so in 2013 is the first year that we got implemented income taxes. And the reason that we got implemented income taxes is not because they needed the money to make roads and infrastructure. It was because our federal government was borrowing money from the Federal Reserve, the central banking system, at an interest rate that they had to pay back. Well, where's the federal government going to get the money to pay back the Federal Reserve for the money that they're printing? Ding, 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 from us, Americans. Taxes. That's where taxes came into play. And so the way the Federal Reserve works is the way it's written is that if they, for every dollar they print, they can go back out and they can loan up to 10% more than 10 times. They can lend 10 times more than what they're printing. So if they print $1 trillion in money, they can lend $4 trillion to you guys. So if you go back in history, you look at 2006, 2007, 2008, they were doing the exact same thing. They started printing money, and then they started allowing decredit home buyers to buy homes. So this is when what happened is the Federal Reserve started printing more capital, and they say, okay, we want to lend it out. Well, this is our max threshold for people with C credit, B credit, and A credit. So what if we just say, if you, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, if we give them the okay to just go from a 650 credit score to a 620 credit score, and you still qualify for a home? But don't stop there. What if we go in and we stop taking only 520 credits, 620 credit scores, and we will take and accept up to a 580 credit score? And so that's what's happening right now, is that they're giving out D credit, people with 580 credit scores and a 60%. They have 60% debt to income ratios. These are D credit buyers, but yet they're pushing these people into residential single family homes and allowing them, and then they're giving them a $15,000 first time home buyers package that they're doing as the stimulus package, right? Well, let me tell you guys, ladies and gentlemen, all that stuff is stimulated from the Federal Reserve, because now they can go out, they lend that money, then they can turn off the light switch on you. And when that happens, all those D credits, when they start going into foreclosure, then the Federal Reserve, they get the insurance money from, they get their insurance money, and then they land up collecting back all that real estate. Then they slowly start to put that back into the market again. And so understand that all of this stuff revolves around our central banking system. It all revolves around the printing of money. And so when you think about hyperinflation, this is the exact same thing that happened in 2007, moving into 2008, with the exact same type of materials. Anything that was a fossil fuel produced, like anything that was petroleum based, like PVC pipe, plumbing fixtures and parts, lumber, building materials, concrete, still went through the roof back in 2007 and 8. And we're starting to see the same type of hyperinflation today. So how do you fix this? So people are sitting there and go, okay, Jerome, I get it. Things are hyperinflating. Now that we know, and now that you spoon fed and forced all this information down our throat, how do we fix it? Where do we put our money? How do we get around this? And where do we go? Now, you could go out, you can invest in something like cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. Why do people like Bitcoin? Well, I'll tell you, the reason is because there's a limited amount of Bitcoin. They're not making any more. And when there's a scarcity of something, it increases the value. What people like about Bitcoin is that there's only a little bit available and it's going up in value. Even though it goes down and fluctuates, there is a scarcity in its value. There's a scarcity of it, so the value of it goes up. That's why people love Bitcoin. That's why people are migrating towards Bitcoin. But look, I'm not going to sit here and tell you guys I'm Bitcoin. What I'm going to tell you is the exact same thing I told hundreds of people at Real Estate Domination 2019 when I stood in front of the room. I said, you can go out and the only real currency in the world is silver and gold. But when you go up and pay for a pizza, you don't go in and put a brick of gold down and say, hey, here's my brick of gold. Can you just shave off a piece of that so I can pay for my pizza and let me have the rest of my gold brick back? And then you go buy a car and say, okay, can you just take 1/3 of this brick of gold right here? Let me pay for this car and get my brick of gold back. That's not the way it works. It's real currency, but it's not the way it works. So I told them right in front of them, I said, look, the only real currency is real estate. And here's why. So look, you've got to invest in a tangible asset to take advantage of hyperinflation. I sit back and say, Who cares if things are hyperinflating? And here's why. Because I don't worry about the hyperinflation of groceries. I don't worry about the hyperinflation of construction materials. I just make sure I underwrite things that fit a business model that support the hyperinflation. Because I know that I'm already experiencing increased costs for labor, and we're already starting to pay our guys more. When you can go in and you start seeing ads where there's fast food restaurants that are offering a $50 check for any applicant that goes in and just comes in for an interview, that's crazy. When you go in and you see like trucking, truck companies offering drivers $14,000 a month in stipend and payroll just to get truck drivers, that's crazy. When you get companies going in and offering you a $1,500 buy-in bonus to work at a fast food restaurant at nominal places, that's crazy. And so understand that all of that is craziness. But if you can position yourself to benefit from it, this is how. So home prices increased 16% last year. So if that means if you bought a home last year, and let's say you paid $400,000 for that home, okay? So you go out, you pay $400,000 for that home. You take $400,000 and you multiply that by 16%. That means that that same $400,000 house today is worth $465,000, ladies and gentlemen. Now, you may have only put 5% down on that single family home. You might have only put 10% down on that single family home. So if you put 10% down on that single family home and you put $40,000 into it, not only is your $40,000 secure, but you have an additional $65,000. So if you sold that today, that same $40,000 is worth $105,000 in your bank account because of the $40,000 you had that you put as a down payment and the $65,000 in appreciation in 1 year. And so now do that as a multiplier. You sit back and you say, okay, I have a $12.5 million apartment complex. So what is that? Times 0.16. That means this year alone, my apartment complex went up $2 million in value. Now, I haven't had it appraised. I'm just going on assumption that it's worth about $12 million based on natural appreciation. And so based on hyperinflation, it's now worth $2 million more than it was just a year ago based on that 16% of appreciation. So the question is, how do you position yourself to take advantage of it? So people that are worried about hyperinflation, look, it's going to continue, ladies and gentlemen. As long as our federal government is printing money, hyperinflation is going to continue. The dollar bill is going to continue to drop in value. And as the dollar bill continues to drop in value, you're not going to sit back and dig a hole and stick it in a coffee can like your grandparents did back in the days and then bury it in your backyard. Why? Because the dollar bill, a single dollar bill, ladies and gentlemen, it drops 3.1% in value every single year. So if you take that money that you were going, that cash money of that same $400,000 house times 0.031%, that means that that same house, if you had that money and not in a tangible asset, that cash is worth $12,400 less today than it was last June of 2020. And ladies and gentlemen, that's crazy. What's happening now is just absolutely crazy. So you don't want to have cash. You don't want to have a coffee can buried in your backyard and sitting there with cash in it. Cash is no longer king, ladies and gentlemen. Real estate is king. And so you have to invest in real estate because real estate truly is the only tangible asset that is going to appreciate like this. And so it's the only asset that's going to give you back an ROI that's going to, during hyperinflation, that's going to pay you handsomely. Now, you can have stocks, you can have insurance, you can have all that stuff. And I have all that stuff. But by far, my real estate is where we've seen the largest appreciated value that won't depreciate because stocks can go back down. If the dollar bill goes down and your stocks drop in value, guess what happens to your money? It drops as well. But if there's if they're printing money, the dollar bill is dropping, you invest in real estate, as that dollar bill is worth less, your real estate is now worth more money. And so you have to understand that as the dollar bill drops, real estate's worth more because it takes more money to buy the same asset. The same asset that you could once build, that $400,000 asset that you could once build for $400,000, you can no longer build that for $400,000 because the lumber's more expensive, the metal's more expensive, the cement's more expensive, everything's more expensive. So now that same asset is worth $465 because the value of the dollar bill and hyperinflation is kicked in, and so now that asset is now worth more. So what you guys do is buy real estate. Now we have some questions in here, and I know they're coming in. I want to be able to answer some of these questions. Daniel, help me out with some of these folks here.
Good. This Doherty said, I see lumber prices falling. Do you see that continuing at this rate?
Well, summer lumber prices is going to go down between 30 to 40%. They're opened up the influx of lumber from the Canadian lumber mills are starting to import it back in, so lumber prices are going to drop back down. Now, this doesn't happen forever, ladies and gentlemen. Now, the printing of money, if they continue printing money and giving handouts, the dollar bill is going to get weaker, and so there's still going to be hyperinflation because you have to understand that as the dollar bill, the value of the dollar bill drops, it takes more money, more of those dollar bills to pay for the same product. So even though lumber independently is dropping, it doesn't mean that everything else around us isn't now, because everything's still, you're starting to see percentage hikes. Now, you don't go to the store and every single item in there hasn't went up 280% like lumber. Lumber has superseded that by a large margin. So we're going to see some depreciation in lumber, God willing, because I mean, if you think about lumber prices have went up almost 400% in some with some material basis over the last 2 years. It's up 280% in just 1 year. Well, we went up 60% the year prior to that before the pandemic. And so I was buying lumber packages for houses 3 months before we turned dirt because I wanted to secure my lumber prices because we kept seeing the lumber prices going up. And it wasn't just the pandemic that did this. It's not just the printing of money that did this to lumber. It was the hurricanes, and it was the rebuilding of stuff that happened down south in 2019, moving into 2020. And then the closing down of one of our largest lumber mills up north affected us. So we were one large lumber mill short nationwide, which was huge for us. So now we're starting to see the influx of lumber. So yes, I do see that lumber is going to start slowly coming down. I think that we'll see a 30 to 40% decrease. And I would presume that we'll see even another 30 to 40% decrease again before the end of the year, God willing. So we should hopefully see lumber decrease by 65 to 70% of its value over the next year. And now don't quote me on that. It's going to depend on what happens, right? And so, but yes, lumber prices will indeed start to drop a little bit because they're one of the things that has inflated the most. But it's still going to be inflated from where it was a year ago. Yes, next question.
Did you mention what is the increased percentage you add for inflation in your analysis?
What is the increased percentage
you add for inflation in your analysis?
So on real estate, normal real estate on normal appreciation should go up between 2 and 3% annually. And so if you assume a 3% increase, that's why property taxes, the tax assessments typically will max out at 3% annually because a healthy market, if you're in a healthy real estate market that's growing, a population is growing, your real estate should increase 2 to 3% in value each and every year. And so that's a good number. Now, this last year, it was 16%. So it's hard to kind of find a medium between that because what is it going to do next year? Well, I don't know. But I'll tell you that real estate, they're not making any more of it. And so it truly is one of the only real asset classes and one of the only real currencies because even though it drops, it'll go back up. And here's an example. We went into the Laguna Beach coastal purchase, my wife and I, back in 2011. We went into Laguna Beach and we got married out there. And so it was one of the areas, we just love it. And so we said, let's buy a house out here. And it was just so expensive when we were getting married, like in 2008 and 9, because everything, when we got married, the prices were at the peak of the market in 2007, 2008. And so we were looking at per square foot prices of $1,100 per square foot in the village of Laguna. Now, when prices plummeted, they went down lower than $600 a square foot. So they almost cut in half by 50%, right? So we almost lost 50% of the value of those houses out there, coastal, when the financial crisis hit and Lehman Brothers collapsed and everything, and all shit hit the fan, right? And so we went in just a couple years later, and we bought at about $700 a square foot, high $600 a square foot. So we kept it for a few years, and we watched the market. And when the prices got to about $1,000 a square foot, I sat back and said, look, there is no way that the prices are going to supersede what they were doing in 2008. And how wrong I was, because so we sold, and we made a great profit on it. We enjoyed the house. We made a great profit. Now, ladies and gentlemen, when I looked at the prices out there a year ago, they were in excess of $1,400 a square foot in the Village. And so mass appreciation. Now they're probably $1,600 a square foot post-pandemic, okay? So 2 to 3% a year is normal appreciation. That's what I would underwrite stuff. And this year's just gotten out of control, and it's going to happen again. You wait, another decade will go by, and we'll be looking at the same type of stuff. You look at history back since the Great Depression. You look at everything over the course of time. Every 10 to 12 years, there's a market correction. And I always tell people, I stood up in front of a room 2 years ago, and I said, I don't know what's going to do it, but something is going to create a market correction. And so now we're talking about hyperinflation. And things have to correct the market. Things are out of control. Okay, the pandemic kind of did it a little bit, and now things are out of control. That bubble has to burst at some point in time. The question is, what's going to do it? Yes, Daniel. Next question.
Do you see building homes with inflated prices and materials much of the risk due to how possibly volatile the residential market may be in the next couple of years by the time these homes are built?
No, and here's why. Yes and no. Okay, so yes, it's a risk if you don't know what you're doing. It's not a risk if you know what you're doing. So you have to look at economics, right? You got to look at economics. One of the things, I went and sat down with some of the city officials up in Arizona, up in Phoenix last week, and it was perfect. Their explanation, it was perfect with this. They said we were one of the top 5 most financially distressed states in the country in 2009. So we took a step back and we did an evaluation of the most progressive states that did not get affected by the economic crisis of 2007. Guess what state that was, ladies and gentlemen? That was the state of Texas. Texas is the Lone Rangers, the Lone Star State. Ladies and gentlemen, these guys know how to build economics. Hopefully those of you guys who moved from California don't go and mess up Texas, right? It's a red state. It's a red state, very progressive, very liberal, and very progressive. But it's so progressive that it got the attention of other states. It was required by the state of Arizona that all of its municipalities, every single small municipality, every county, every city, they had to go in and study Texas, their economic growth patterns, their progressive growth patterns, what they did to continue building homes, scraping dirt, and developing during one of the worst economic downturns in the world's history. And so the state of Arizona required this out of all their building and zoning officials, their planning department, and they went in and they started dissecting. And instead of being a state that focuses only on people, on travel, vacationing, leisure, the arts, and stuff like that, we're going to start creating an economic state based on tech, on trends, on job growth, and that's what they did. And so if you go back and you look at Arizona today, it's a whole different state than it was in 2008. It's not even close. It's not even close to the same state. They started working on their infrastructure, their roads, their highways, and they started investing in that stuff. And so why is this stuff important when we talk about the risk factors of buying land and building houses? Because you don't go into just any market to build houses. Now, you can do this in your market, but you still have to have a business plan. And you say, okay, I'm only going to spend this much for each lot that I buy. And then knowing that you have an inflated price to build, you underwrite it based on those construction costs. And then if there's hyperinflation, you should be able to sell it for that hyperinflated price. Now, if the market crashes, what you have to be able to make sure is you do it based on a worst case scenario. So in the last year, the market has increased by 16%, okay? So let's say that all of that goes away and another 15% go away. Let's say that the market drops by 30%, okay? So you take a house, and let's say you underwrite that house $500,000. You're gonna go out and build a $500,000 home. And let's say the market tanks by 30%. On a $500,000 home, if you exercise the exact same process that we've been utilizing for well over 20 years, you should make anywhere between $90,000 and $120,000 of profit on that house, depending on how you build it, how you manage the construction, and how you trim it out. Now, if it drops 30%, what's a 30% decrease in that house? If you make $100,000 in profit, you still have $70,000 in profitability in that house. And so even in the economic crisis, ladies and gentlemen, even during the 2008 economic crisis, I made money on every single home I built. And here's where you have to be careful. Now, if you leverage yourself and you have multiple of them going and you have 5 houses going, you're servicing debt and you can't sell them, it's the debt that takes you under. It's not the value of the house that takes you under, it's the debt. And so you have to have a business plan set up where you can service the debt. And there's not enough rooftops nationwide, so single family homes are becoming more desirable as rentals. And so what ends up happening, you look at companies like Blackstone, they have bought over 1/4 of our inventory in the residential single family home market in the last year. 1/4 of our inventory has been bought by Blackstone and companies like that, by institutional buyers. I shouldn't say by Blackstone, by institutional buyers. So if institutional buyers like Blackstone are buying 1/4 of our residential homes, ladies and gentlemen, they're renting them. It's part of their infrastructure and their business model. And so please understand that if you can rent the house for what your mortgage payment is, how do you lose? So just make sure that your bill costs support your mortgage. If you can support your mortgage by renting it, then you let the market appreciate, you can sell it. Or just sell it for a decreased 30% price and then take your profit and walk. It's when you get greedy and people get stubborn with that price and they're servicing debt. That, ladies and gentlemen, is where they make mistakes in real estate. You lose your real estate, but it's still profitable. I still made at least $30,000 on every home I sold during the financial crisis. Next question.
Do you see industrial as a better bet versus building residential with the rise of e-commerce, and how volatile the SFR market is looking?
Industrial is great. I mean, you got to understand, ladies and gentlemen, there's a lot of different sectors of real estate. You can use real estate for 2 means. One, as a job, right, to generate large capital. So buying land, building a house, that's income creation. Okay, that's a job. I'm just giving you guys a source to go out and generate larger profits quicker through the means of buying real estate, buying land, and building a house that you can deploy into long-term holdings that gives you that residual income, that gives you that passive income. And so understand that through the means of passive income is the goal, should be the goal for each and every one of you guys. So industrial warehouse can do that for you, where you go out, you invest in an industrial warehouse because there's a big need for it. E-commerce is growing. You guys have heard me talk about e-commerce. We're still buying industrial warehouse buildings. And I like that little 12,000 square foot model where you're kind of piggybacking the big guys and you go and you get that cash flow model on a 12,000 square foot building. And you cash flow that thing for a few grand a month, and then you have passive income, and they're easy to lease. They'll always be leased. There's always going to be a need for them. So I like industrial warehouse. Okay, next question. Let's see. Which question was that one, Daniel?
One of the last ones.
Was that one? Is there a way to
there's
read
one more.
the Texas or North Florida? Okay, so Daniel, do you see industrial? Okay, so Adriana, Texas, North Florida. LOL. Yeah. So yes, and it is funny, Adriana. I mean, Texas and Florida are killing it right now. Their economics are just booming. Arizona, booming. I mean, Arizona is just killing it. You look at places like Oregon, it's killing it. And so understand that those markets are just growing and booming exponentially. And so you can do this in your own market, and you can buy land, build houses in your own market. Just know that if the market tanks, you may not make $80,000 on a $450,000 house. You might make something closer to about $50,000. And if it's your first one and you make an extra $50,000, is that so bad? And that's the way you got to evaluate it. And so you just have to make sure that you have a plan to service that debt. And so don't get greedy and try to hold on to it. People get stubborn. They go, I have to sell that house for $500,000. I'm not going to negotiate it. And they go through denial and they hang on to it and they continue to service that debt and service that debt. And then all of a sudden they're diminishing their liquid cash, and then they have no more they can service, and then it goes into foreclosure. That's where foreclosures happen. But if you can service your debt, and if you can go in and if you can service your debt and you can go in and rent that property, you're fine. All the business models that we're doing in Oregon, all the business models that we're doing in California, that we're doing here locally, they're supported with the rental incomes and how much the rental rates are, so that we can service that debt by leasing the properties. Okay. Now, is there a way to read the economics of Texas, a government publication? All that stuff's public knowledge. You can just go in and then also whatever municipality you want to build in, if you go in and talk to one of the planners, the city planners, they'll give you all of the stats. And yes, you can go in and get all of that information on the growth of any state across the continental United States. And if you have a specific area that you're really hyper focused on, you go in and sit with the planners and you find out what their progressive growth plan is, what their growth has been, how many people have influxed, how many jobs are available, what their employment rates are. All of that information is public knowledge. You guys can get any of that with simple phone calls or a visit to the down to City Hall. Idaho has a 200% increase in 5 years. Yes, Idaho is booming. All the expense, a lot of empty nesters, retirees, and middle class sector people are moving to Idaho because it's too expensive to live in California. It's too expensive to live in Oregon. It's too expensive to live in Washington State. So they're migrating to Idaho. Big economic growth in Idaho, as well as Utah. This is happening in a lot of places. Colorado is booming. Benny, what would you think about the Chicago market? Chicago's a good market, but you got to be careful in Chicago because Chicago is a blue state, and all politics set aside, they don't support progressive growth. So it's harder to get things zoned in Chicago, in the Chicago and Chicago suburbs. So you have to go in where zoning is almost in your favor because they're very proactive in regards to growth and supportive growth. We're dense building, and so it's really hard to work with them. So they're not landlord friendly either. They're more tenant friendly. So those are states you have to be careful. So what I like about Chicago is I like to go in and buy, stabilize an asset, and then sell that asset. That's what Chicago is great for. And then deploy your money into a red state. Because, ladies and gentlemen, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, if you're doing this real estate game, ladies and gentlemen, you got to support the people that support you. And it's you're an entrepreneur. You buy real estate, you're an entrepreneur. You're an investor. You're investing in stuff. You better follow the people that are supporting what you're doing. My parents and everybody I love is blue. They're all Democrats. But ladies and gentlemen, I don't sit there and fight with them over Thanksgiving dinner, over politics. I sit down and I just know what I have to do to support my family and my business and the life that I live. And so as great as Chicago is, I love being an investor out there, but I like to invest, stabilize, and then take it to a state that's really progressive, that is landlord friendly, and that really values me as an investor, as a developer. Okay. Cash cow, I love that. Do you think towards the end of the year we will have many foreclosures hitting the market, more than we have right now? The forbearances are coming up on their expiration, so that right there alone is only one factor that's going to stimulate foreclosures. The market is getting hyperinflated to a point right now where the average person, the first-time home buyer, can't afford to get into a home. So we're starting to hit max capacity for home prices. They can still squeeze a little bit more out of them, especially if they're giving free handouts out and people are starting to make more money. But we are going to start seeing more foreclosures. There's going to be multiple reasons why this happens. I'm telling you guys, the Federal Reserve, ladies and gentlemen, they're giving out D-credit loans right now. And these are the people that are going to go into foreclosure first. When they turn the lights off and they stop pumping money into the economy, and all these D-credit buyers, they're D-credit buyers for a reason, because they're not responsible, right? Now there's some D-credit people that maybe ran into some misfortune through divorces or whatever, one-time bankruptcies that they had, and they'll rekindle, but the mass majority of them aren't like that. they're frivolous with their money, they land up spending it recklessly, and those are the people that are going to foreclosure. So yes, I think we'll see an increase. I don't think that'll be the peak of it, but I think we'll start seeing an increase by the end of the year. Okay. Do you see BlackRock eventually completely manipulating the market, always outbidding buyers, turning the general public into all renters? I hear there's a subsidiary of the Feds. Well, I'll tell you guys this. That's what's happening right now. They're starting to take control of it. We as Americans have to change that, right? You got to go take advantage of what you're doing and become an investor. Now, if Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and they start putting parameters, the CFPB comes in and says, hey, look, we have to put parameters on lending. And they do what they did back in 2009 when the Patriot Act was put together, which they should have never put the Patriot Act together, but it was put together. And so they sit back and say they started putting parameters. And they said, hey, investors cannot be the first buyers. And if they do that, then BlackRock is out, right? And so there's probably some influence there's some internal politics that probably goes on there. I don't know about all of that in regards to the internal politics between BlackRock and the federal government. There could be some truth to that, but I'm not 100% sure. But nonetheless, ladies and gentlemen, that is hyperinflation in a nutshell. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what we are facing as Americans. So the question is, how, instead of being a victim of hyperinflation, which most people feel they are, how do you take advantage of hyperinflation? And that's the question. And the answer to you was answered in this video, and I'm going to repeat it again. The way that you take advantage of hyperinflation is by simply buying real estate and taking advantage of the mass appreciation of the only real currency in the world, and that's real estate. Ladies and gentlemen, if you guys like the information that I'm talking about today, do me a huge favor and give me a thumbs up down below, letting me know that the content is of value to you. And click and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you're watching this on repeat, just hit hashtag repeat, click and subscribe, pound that thumbs up button. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you guys, and God bless. You guys go out and make it a great day, and don't forget, go out and compound your success.